That's my pleasure to start the second session with the presentation of Simon Roux from Ministry of the Environment in Finland. Simon is an architect, working in the wood building program at the Ministry of Environment of Finland, and also has experience as a researcher at Aalto University School of Arts, Design and Architecture. So welcome.
So it's a very great pleasure today to try to condense a lot of work into a very short presentation. I hope the material will be shared with you afterwards, mainly because in my work in our wood building program, we have a viewpoint over many, many different aspects of wood building in Finland. But the problem is we see a lot of things from quite far. So we really skim through the surface. It's a very interesting job, let's say, because as an architect and as a building environmental assessor, I have to be quite critical about the environmental impacts of construction industry. But at the same time, my job is also to promote the use of timber in construction in Finland. So one has to try to keep a balance between understanding things behind understanding the science behind our work, but also being involved in politics. How do we influence decision makers? How do we support municipalities? How do we encourage companies to do more research and development? So in that way, we try to find our way. We've been able, within our wood program, to put about 13 million euros into funding to lots and lots of very small projects. We're funding now just like more than 100 different research and development projects. But at the end of the day, we see what is coming out of these projects. It's kind of like seeing what are the phenomena, what are rising, what are the trends, where are things going. And in that way, my best hope is that I make myself redundant, because instead of having to be the missionary for wood building, eventually I will hear that everybody else is telling us the same stories that we've been sharing ourselves. So I've tried to make a presentation of some kind of narrative, going from the big picture down to lots of small issues and then back to the big picture again. So of course, let's start with the political agenda. So Finland has the target to be climate neutral by 2035. And in fact, beyond that, carbon negative. And that means that there have been a lot of individual projects about finding low carbon roadmaps for different industries. So we are just one part of a much bigger picture coordinated by the government. So we've talked already today, actually we heard already about what does carbon neutrality mean on a national level. So it means that we have to try to get our emissions down as much as possible. At the same time, we need to maintain the amount of wood that is sequestered in the forest, because at the moment, effectively, the forest is the only carbon sink that we have of any significance. And this slide is like 2015 situation. I was wondering what is going to happen to our carbon sink after that. This is now the most recent one I have. And you can see that already, like in, 2018, there was suddenly like a lot of more wood taken out of the forest than was expected by these projections. Very interested to know what's going to happen this year, because now, as you know, we are no longer importing wood from Russia into the Finnish saw timber industry. So that will definitely have an impact. Last year, the price of wood went really high, so there's a lot of interest for exporting it to America. So let's see how well we can actually maintain that carbon sink in our forestry. Luckily, that is more the role of our Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry. Our job in the Ministry of Environment is promoting the demand for the use of wood in construction. But we need to always be aware of that upper level. So in our Department of the Built Environment, which is also in the Ministry of Environment, we're doing everything possible to bring down the emissions related to the construction industry. So that has very much to do with, of course, with energy efficiency of buildings, energy efficiency of the production of energy, but also the carbon emissions related to construction materials. That's why we are both promoting the use of wood. It's a makes great sense. Finland is very much based on the bioeconomy, but also trying to control the emissions of the construction industry by bringing regulations for low carbon construction, setting limit values for construction. Our work, well, I'd say in yellow, I've put where mostly our work in our wood building program is focused. So particularly increasing the use of wood in urban development, trying to support productivity in wood construction. We do some communication work. We have a lot of information coming in and out of our department. The communications part is very important and very difficult. And particularly we're looking at tools and methods for calculating carbon storage and construction. And then of course, we're also doing work promoting circular economy. But we are working together, our Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Transport and Communications. So there's a lot of coordination work that has to be done between different ministries if this is going to have any kind of scalability and any kind of large effect. There's a nice word in Finnish, toiveiden tynnyri. It means a barrel of wishes. So when we talk about using wood in construction, there are so many great wishes and expectations that are often very difficult to realize. But these, I think, are very important for us, and it is the reason why our work is splintered into so many different directions at one time. Of course, the bottom line is sustainable forestry. And you can have a long debate today about what does that mean? How do you certify it? How do you find chains of custody? How do you protect the future? What is sustainable forestry? Luckily, that's not my job. But we do a lot of work on understanding carbon storage and low carbon construction. So basically the rules and regulations for how do you estimate it, calculate it, prove it, certify it. A lot of work has to be done, particularly in the timber industry in Finland, because it is a very splintered industry with many, many medium-sized companies trying to get some kind of ecosystem going of how do they collaborate, how do they get systems efficiency. So industrial quality and value creation is very much important. When we talk to municipalities and politicians, of course, it's about local economy. They want to know where are the companies, where are the jobs, where's the money from, where's the tax. So local economy, we have to understand the needs of the politicians and bureaucrats that we deal with. Circular economy, a very, very, very big problematic. Of course, it's a whole European scale issue, but at least we try to understand what does circular economy mean from the point of view of wood construction. Then understanding life cycle properties, because when you build, you're talking about an investment that has to last from 50, 100, 200 years. So we know what has happened, particularly in industrial processes from modernism, from the 50s, the 60s and 70s. We've built many buildings with a very short service life, leaving us with a lot of big problems for their renovation, for their fixing. So idea is that we should think about what are the life cycle properties, the reusability, the possible to fix, the possible to bring it back into circular economy, understanding the properties of buildings from a very long-term perspective. And then, of course, we need to understand the users of buildings. Because, for example, schools are a very popular target for construction out of wood in Finland, mainly because the parents, the school owners, the municipalities are very interested in what is the quality of the indoor environment. They're worried about having been in old concrete buildings that are moldy and bad for health. So often the indoor climate is one of the most important selling targets, selling arguments for the promotion of wood. And it also supports, for example, massive timber working with single materials. So how do we respond to all of these things if we talk about dealing with people? We have many, many different actions. Particularly important for us is the whole idea of green public procurement. As a public authority, we can't force local authorities to what they do. The state itself builds only a very small amount of new properties, but we can support the competency with green public procurement. Of course, as I say, they need to look at different roadmaps for low carbon construction. trying to understand how to influence local governance. So it's not so much top-down, but it's more about developing consensus, getting local municipalities to develop their own strategies. Then understanding multi-story housing systems. If we talk about like the scalability of what we do, the multi-story housing is probably the most important target, certainly for us. If we talk about creating more bulk from wood construction, the scalability and the industrialization is very much related to that. But at the same time, it has to be much more human-centered. So that is incredibly important, whether it's like renovations or indoor climate, whatever. And then also we are very interested in social and healthcare. It's a very difficult market to get into or to promote, but certainly we hope that there are actions that we can do to support it. And also sustainability is very much important in our new architecture program. So bringing up the role of architecture as a political instrument is something that is very important, not just thinking about construction as a technical activity, but as something that affects the whole society. So one main issue in our department at the moment is bringing the life cycle approach into building norms. So that means like introducing the scientific methodology of life cycle analysis, but bringing it into politics, bringing it into regulations. You know, the science, we've been doing the science for like 30, 40 years, but bringing it into the regulations of a country is not very easy. Luckily, we do have, I'd say, a broad consensus around the whole idea. We don't have consensus about use of land, but we do have some consensus about the properties of buildings. So this means that we are introducing carbon footprint calculation based on standardized calculations, which you can use all over Europe. So that's the methodology is standardized, but the application of the methodology is not necessarily standardized. It has to be understood, localized. What does it mean? How do you apply the European standard in your particular country? And then we've also introduced the idea of carbon handprint. So I don't know if the term is useful, not if you know the term, but the idea is that the footprint is kind of, say, the negative impacts of construction, and then the handprint should be the positive impacts. So it means that we find what are the climate benefits. So it could be renewable energy production, it could be carbon storage, carbonization of concrete, et cetera, et cetera. We need to go away from a negative view of construction to trying to encourage the positive views. This is not always easy. Maybe I'm too cynical myself, but anyway, we can put laws about putting limit values on carbon footprints, but what do we do about the knowledge about carbon storage? It's an open question. So, okay, it's a methodology. You define which structures are calculated, whether it's main structures, building service systems, site inlet structures. You do calculate, for example, cellars and foundations. Very difficult because that's related to the site. You could be given a very bad site, which takes a huge amount of concrete to keep your building up, or you could have a great site. So we do calculate it, but it's not included in the limit value. Otherwise, it becomes unfair because the city often will determine what site you get. It has to be equal. So this is basically running through the standardized calculation methodology for life cycle analysis. We include all the parts. I know, for example, I think in Sweden, they just look at material productions and construction phase for a material passport for the building. But in Finland, I think it's important that we understand the whole life cycle of the building. But it does mean that in the parts of gray, there's lots of information that it might be has to be done with default values. And an important part, I'd say, is operational energy use, because we assume in the calculation the decarbonization of our energy supplies. Because if you're looking at the next 50 years, we better be sure that the production of energy has a lower carbon emissions. And that means that there's more emphasis on the production of buildings. So the material properties of buildings become more and more important. We have, I'd say, the essential tools. We have the methodology defined. There's now been new comments about have we got it right from the point let's say, for our stakeholders? My colleagues are now writing the legal text for how to apply that. Then providing generic data so we can make comparable estimates of buildings' life cycle impacts. And then definitely needing to support the digitalization so that we can collect the information more easily from buildings. And then we've been trying to understand what is the right kind of limit value for buildings. So our colleagues here at Beonova, they kind of looked at different scenarios. So they have a reference scenario. What is the basic carbon, the typical carbon footprint for buildings, and think how much can they typically bring it down if they use low energy solution? How much can they bring it down by using ground heat pumps? I can bring it down a bit. How much can you bring it down using low carbon concrete? And how much can you bring it down by using timber? And that means that you can bring anything up to like 28, 40%, 43%, depending on the building types, and also depending on the ground conditions. So we're trying to find what is some kind of cost optimal, realizable, feasible carbon target. Then talking about carbon storage, I'd say it's quite a big issue. It's best to look at the full reports if you want to get into real nitty-gritty questions. But let's say that in Finland, we have so much forest, we absorb a lot of carbon every year. We have fairly large amount of wood already in our built environment. And then we have to try and make some estimates about how much typically a wood building can contain carbon. There are very big differences, but you need to have some kind of generic values. But of course, the bottom line here is carbon storage grows very slowly with current building activity. So repeating the question, we're not going to save the world by building from wood, but we need to understand the mathematics and numbers behind it. Then this is like just a analysis done like 3 years ago, trying to understand where is the wood in our wooden construction in Finland, mostly in detached houses, like small individual houses, because like sometimes the wood building has something like a 95% or 98% market share. So that's all in those. But then if we look at multi-story housing, only like 7%, and commercial public buildings, maybe only like 3%. So these are where we really need to make effort, and it means political effort, in getting more growth in these larger projects. So yeah, there's a lot of understanding about trying to understand the significance of handprints and footprints. I'd say the main issue is that it's kind of related to the idea of carbon neutrality, but I think carbon neutrality should be looked at on a whole national state. You can't look at one building and tell me that it's carbon neutral, because you've done a lot of emissions to make that building anyway. And where you assume the benefits come from is kind of like a mathematical assumption. So we really need to look much bigger to understand carbon neutrality, because it means an ecosystem of so many different moving parts. But it's an important part of the argument for wood construction. Too much small print in this. Let me just pull out the main points. Firstly, we need more scientific results. We need much more better science about understanding carbon storage in construction. That's incredibly important. How does harvesting of wood affect the forest and the long-term structure? But it is also good for the idea of having stored carbon available in timber products. So it's a big question about what products are containing wood, which products are we using in construction is very important. Not just making big assumptions about how many multi-story buildings we should make, but about which products are actually being used. Where is the carbon actually being used in construction? Understanding the anatomy of buildings much better. So back to what we're doing in our wood building program. So we have very ambitious targets. The idea that we could have up to 45% of all publicly procured buildings from wood. This is a very, very difficult target. I really don't think we're going to meet it. If you think about the disruption in our markets in the last 3 years, the amount of activity in construction, municipal authorities are very nervous about where they put their money. Are they going to make an investment decision? Are they going to take the risks? So the market is definitely quite unstable. But it's still important that the ministry has these targets, that we come out with these targets, because that definitely encourages local authorities also to come up with the same message. So yeah, this was 2019 before coronavirus. We set these our targets, but I think I'd say these targets, they are feasible and they're definitely optimistic. I feel that there's a lot of risk in our ability to reach these targets, but it does mean that we do need to support municipalities, because the municipalities are the ones that are controlling planning. They have the competency to deal with building permits. They're definitely implementing these strategies, but we are trying to at least create a positive vision, let's say. Too many numbers here, but let's pull out some. Education buildings. You've seen many great examples of very nice wooden schools in Finland. It's definitely a very good market for construction. Each building in many ways is kind of a unique product. The flexibility of building with wood suits extremely well to education buildings. Residential blocks of flats is very small percentage, and I think these are very ambitious targets. But I did a calculation that in Finland, it would mean like about 20 multi-story buildings, typical size multi-story buildings in a year. That's not impossible. And these are just like by public authority using public money. But as I say, very ambitious targets. And even if the target is so ambitious, what is the impact? So if we weren't using wood, then let's say the emissions related to the buildings, the use of building materials would be even higher. So already we are bringing it down a bit by using wood. And even if we push the market segment up really high, this is like 45% of all that, it's still fairly negligible. I wouldn't say not negligible, but it's a fairly small, slow process. The reason these are coming down is because we're building less and less each year with public money. But for me, the big problem is that this gray segment, so that's like building that is not using wood as a structural frame, is still dominant. It has the dominant effect. So this is why we need our low carbon construction regulations if we want to have any kind of effect on this typically concrete segment of our markets. So we need to both be promoting the wood and bringing the low carbon regulations. Luckily, we have many different collaborators. As I say, my job is to make myself redundant. So we have Motiva. They are an agency that has a lot of experience in teaching about energy efficiency. So they are also supporting us in helping municipalities understand wood construction. Keino, so we have networks introducing more innovative procurement procedures. They're definitely helping us. Then, of course, we have our Environmental Institute, Natural Resources Institute, and also a lot of research. I think this is quite an interesting project, this Knock on Wood. It's between Finland and Sweden, understanding about how do you control housing demand, housing supply, and local governance. How does it affect the market? So you need to understand the things and you need to understand the people at the same time. How do they work together? Our evolution has been great. In the 1940s, Finland was exporting little wooden boxes all over the world. Now we are definitely, well, this isn't in Finland, but we are definitely on the front line of the international digitalization of timber construction, etc. So I'd say there's a fabulous evolution that's happening in wood construction. Actually, I think I have quite a few of your buildings here. There you go. This is not sponsored by Puurakentajat, but anyway. So definitely there's a symbolic value attached to these kind of flagship buildings. In that way, it's very important for the positive political image of Finland as a country of wood building. Whether you're arriving at the airport or Stora Enso or Wood City, we can talk about Helsinki Central Library. This is you were talking about this great structure now. So we have great flagship projects, which are great for the architecture magazines, very important for the image of the country. And at the same time, we're trying to keep track of how many buildings are actually made out of wood, like the kind of ordinary buildings. So it's a lot of, you can see it's mostly large elements, CLT space elements, light frame, flat elements, much less post and beam, laminated logs. This is a good finished speciality. You can build up to 4 stories just using logs that don't squash. But it means that only 130 buildings, and we're talking about, what, 27 years. But that is, of course, since our fire regulations changed, the technology has definitely improved, the market's improved, the process has improved, the municipalities are more interested, the investors are more interested, particularly public authorities. So it's getting there. It's very slow, but we're getting there. And then we have to talk more and more nowadays about hybrid structures. That nice library building in Helsinki, it's actually this amazing concrete and steel structure, but it looks like a wood building. So what is more important for the public? You know, if the wood is completely hidden, what does it mean to them? Oh, it's got a great carbon footprint. What? They don't understand. What does the carbon footprint mean? So the symbolic value is, of course, important as well. And also hybridization, so that we're increasing the market for wood, not just being ideological, but must be 100% wood structure. Definitely finding opportunities for wood. And these are very sophisticated manufacturing processes to create such curved surfaces out of wood. Then what does it look like from the outside? We always look at these like really horrendous newspaper headlines about, oh, the sprinklers went off and it made the whole Europe's largest, this is in Helsinki or in Vantaa. What happens when the sprinklers goes off because you forgot the sauna door off, sauna door open? Or companies going bankrupt because the local authorities can't agree on the interpretation of the building regulations. Companies come and go, bankruptcy for some, success for others. Some property developers may be taking money from their clients. So we definitely need to keep the eye on quality of construction and the reliability of wood, because if we just make great environmental promises, but we don't deliver a trustworthy business, then we lose credibility. The view from inside of my work, we have this huge range of different research projects touching so many different topics. And we could actually give, like, each one of these words represents very interesting projects. So with 100 research projects, we have an amazing network of competency. It's great to provide support to universities, to research institutes, to get young students doing their diploma works, their master's thesis, their doctorate thesis on a subject. Very important that it's slowly happening. And if it looks a little bit chaotic, I can see it myself in some kind of map. So this is a list of all of the main environmental assessment criteria used for buildings. It kind of covers the ISO standards, the key performance indicators for buildings. And I'd say our projects pretty much touch almost any one of these criteria for assessing the sustainability of construction. They represent certainly the dominant solutions which we are trying to promote. So low carbon solutions, energy efficient solutions, environmental protection, sustainable use of natural resources, adaptability of buildings, resilience of our built environment, life cycle costs, about operating responsibility, promoting the health and the safety of building users. These fit themselves into basic categories of sustainability. So climate change, natural resources, economics and society. And I find in my work, I realize that this stuff, climate change, natural resources, is very much science-based. But then economics and society is about politics, about values. So we really need to find ways, let's say, to change our society, because we're trying to deliver better value, better performance, better quality, but reducing the life cycle impacts. Not easy. But we have many different follow-on steps for our work. trying to forecast, understanding the instability at the moment in our markets, humble governments, getting more collaboration between different public authorities and companies, understanding what consumers want, promoting low carbon policy, improving digital processes, funding companies, and we have more money in the future for the low carbon built environment program. So our work at least carries on with always more funding availability. And then finally, I'd say about the cultural dimension of the European Green Deal, because we need also actually to change our society, because our society keeps on doing things the same way. We kind of stuck in a vicious circle that if we don't change society, we don't change our built environment. If we don't change our built environment, we don't change our society. So we really need to understand, certainly to support niches like new novelty, we need diversity in solutions. We need to make sure that our regulations don't stop innovations coming out if we have the chance that any kind of new change is going to have a bigger effect. So we really need to support that. And then this is a nice work from Joseph Bius in Bas. The idea of this is that there are these concrete stones, basalt stones, they're the same size, they don't change. They represent, let's say, our society, our built environment. When you put a new tree in, the tree is very small, insignificant, the stone is quite big. But if you wait 40 years, 50 years, 80 years, that tree becomes much more bigger, much more important, let's say, than that stone. So the idea is that we can really live in some kind of harmony with our environment. So I think we really need to understand the cultural dimension of our work, not just look at it from the scientific, technological point of view. And certainly, I hope we can connect art to the climate movement. If one tree is like a work of art, a forest is a social movement. So we're talking about a much, much bigger view of our world. And that's it. We have that's our website. And only 4 of us, we certainly keep ourselves busy. And I have no idea how much time I've used.